Encounter.
It feels very
Hello and welcome to the Unwanted Opinion podcast, the show in which me and my friends give our unwanted opinion on all things film. Today I'm joined by my good friend Gonzalo.
Hey, how we doing?
Hey, and I'm doing well. And there's no Kyle. It's like every week one of you is missing. That's what it feels like these days.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh man, we're busy folk. Folk.
I know you are. How are you doing today, anyway, Gonzalo?
Oh, I'm doing great. A bit tired, but very excited to record this episode with you.
Yes. So, on today's episode, we are talking about world cinema. This is our first episode where we're solely focusing on films from across the world. Me and Gonzalo are going to give films from a few countries each, different places, and so it's not going to be able to focus solely in one continent or one country. But this is more of an introductory episode to world cinema and some of our favourite foreign films.
Emphasis on introductory because I am very basic. Whereas Lewis has probably watched films from over 20 countries, I do not have that same level of experience film watching. So yes, give me a break. One of them is very much a cop-out.
Nah, to be fair, it's good that we have, someone from Spain here and someone who kind of at least knows that cinema quite well.
That's true.
There you go. So, well, on that note, we also have reviews for After Yang, Kogonada's sophomore effort, and of course the controversial Netflix's Blonde. So that will all be on today's show. But let's get started, Gonzalo.
Yes.
And why don't we start off? Well, since I don't have anyone to choose from, and I don't like to start with myself, I want to start with you. So
I'm put on the spot. That's fine. This is great, Kyle. I miss you. Okay, so I've chosen two countries, and to start off with, I'm going with my own nationality. Let's go with a Spanish film. To be completely honest with you, I don't watch a lot of Spanish cinema. I am very close with like the politics and kind of whole deal around Spanish cinema. I know way too many of the people that actually produce it and work on it, and I am not a big fan of most of the things that come out of Spain.
Right.
We have this big issue where lots of cinema gets public funding, and a lot of movies, the production, let's just say, make more money from movies that fail in the box office than movies that don't. Don't know if you've seen The Producers. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember you mentioning this when I reviewed The Good Boss on the show.
Yes.
They have the Javier Bardem film, and it's quite interesting. So why is that the case?
It's a lot of it's very much a sort of mafia, which I guess is kind of the same deal when you talk about Hollywood movies, just to like a bigger extent. But it's a closed system where just the same people make movies over and over again, and it's less about talent and more about notoriety. And you get a lot of people just producing and making very low quality, low effort kind of films just for the sake of releasing something. And again, in order to, most of the time, just flat out commit tax fraud. So,
right.
So it is exceptional when you get actual artists or directors who actually, have an idea and actually a story that they want to tell. And it is rare that you get movies like you said, The Good Boss, which you said you enjoyed a lot, where it's like a project where clearly there was an intention other than just profit when it came to making it. Speaking about that, this movie, funnily enough, not directed by a Spanish native, but produced and shot in Spain with the help again of like some small financial aid from the government and some production companies here. We're talking about El Laberinto del Fauno, otherwise known as Pan's Labyrinth.
Yes.
Yes, so this is a Guillermo del Toro film, and
yes, the iconic.
Yes,
probably his most iconic film to date. Yes.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's one of those that really defined him as a director and the kind of things that he liked to do, which is mixing that horror and monster kind of very gothic kind of and folkloric way of fiction that he has with a very intimate, very human story. So Guillermo del Toro, not born in Spain, he was born in Mexico, I believe Guadalajara, which is funny because we also have a Guadalajara in Madrid, but not the same one. And he directed this film. It's the film I chose to represent Spanish cinema because I believe it's the best of Spanish cinema in the sense that it takes a lot from the culture, the folklore, and the history of Spain within its story, but at the same time, it's open to it feels more of like a project that actually wanted to say something and was open to ideas that came from abroad, because obviously you had a very director that had worked in like big bad Hollywood before, and you get a really nice mix of like a very Spanish crew with like a very professional director, and you get a fantastic movie out of it. It's set 1944, I think. I looked this up earlier. Yes, it's set in 1944.
Because it deals very heavily with the Spanish.
Yes, the Spanish Civil War.
Civil War, I'm pretty sure.
So I don't know. Oh man, I'm a terrible Spaniard. I'm not very good with dates, so I'm not sure if this was during or
dates
during
and
the
time
war.
Are your problem.
I've always been absolutely terrible with dates and time. I remember in my history exams, I've gotten away with a lot of, and then later on, years passed and this happened. Yeah, actually, like when redacting big bits of history.
How did you get away? How did you get away with
I
saying
got
that?
points taken off for not doing specific dates, but my history was very precise and great. I just could not hit the fucking dates.
So you remembered the narrative.
Exactly. I know the events that happened, and I know the order they happened in. I know the people they happened to. I have no fucking clue what the actual dates were.
You'd be terrible on a quiz show.
I would be horrible. Except from like very specific dates which are funny, like the year that the king and queen of Spain, Fernando and Isabella I, got married, and I know that one because it was 1469, and that has 69 in it, and they got married. So that one I remember.
Right.
But apart from that.
Jesus Christ.
Yes. So the thing is, I don't. I'm gonna look this up so I don't look like a complete and utter idiot. But I don't remember if 1944 is the pre-war, not the pre-war. During the war or after the war ended. Kind of like the post-war era, because both of them were very, very bad and chaotic. And this movie takes place in the north of Spain. Which was like some of the last kind of like quote unquote refuges of the, let's say, the leftist side of the war, to kind of explain it.
Right.
Leftist on big quotation marks, but yes, not the nationals, basically. So this movie follows a child whose mother recently remarried to this decorated colonel general. Who's got this aura of grandness and stuff. A spoiler alert, he's an asshole. And it deals with her idea, or the idea of her facing a reality that is, so one of the most unpleasant things any human child could grow up in, which is war zone. And her retreating to this fantasy world in order to cope with what's happening in her world. It's incredibly dark, but at the same time surprisingly hopeful. It has a lot of like really interesting like visuals. It takes a lot from different folklores, not just Spanish one, but like adapts it, mix it with Greek mythology and a lot of other kind of like visual identities in order to create like this really interesting kind of like a tactile fantasy world where bugs turn into fairies, and there are men with eyes on their hands, and it's quite iconic. The monsters in this movie, and again, very, very dark. No, I wouldn't recommend showing this to a very young child, but it's the kind of film that really explores the trauma that can happen when you grow up in this kind of situation, and also the very generational trauma that Spain is to this day is still dealing with from this very recent civil war.
In many ways, Pan's Labyrinth is already timeless.
Yes.
Would you say?
Yes, 100%. It's dated very specifically. It's telling a story that's very specific to time, but the way it tells it and the way it focuses on the human aspect of that conflict and the effect that it has on people, it feels like a story that could very well be told about any war, whether recent or past, and anyone living through them. So yeah, I feel like it's a beautiful combination of that fantasy world and the idea of escapism with the idea of facing reality, and how sometimes and again, like, it feels like Guillermo del Toro put a lot of himself into this movie, and a lot of the crew was absolutely incredible, like the designs and the makeup and the work. And it's like the thesis of the movie ends up being this idea of, yes, fantasy can be very important. The stories that we tell, our folklore, our imagined realities are just as strong as and important as the ones that we inhabit, you know? And it's a great message. I think it's a fantastic message, and I really like this movie. I've watched it like a couple times. Really fucking good.
Del Toro's best film, Gonzalo, would you say?
Oh, so far, from the ones I've seen, I've not seen all of Del Toro's movies, but from the ones I've seen, I think it's the most cohesive. I think it's the most overall quality throughout the entire movie, because I do love Del Toro and I do love Pacific Rim, but Pacific Rim is very much a very different type of film.
I forgot. I forgot he directed that.
Yes, he did direct that.
Oh, brought Pacific Rim.
I like that movie. Oh, it's not a good movie, but it's a great movie. It's a really.
It's actually kind of. That's one of those weird films where it's like all kind of great directors have them in their library. Where it's like, wait. Yeah. He directed that, or she directed that? What? It's so bizarre that
it was clearly a thing he wanted to do for himself, you know. But then again, he directed both Hellboy films, you know, and
yeah, he did.
Second one, way worse and way better than the first one somehow. If you haven't watched the Hellboy films, it's really interesting.
No, I actually kind of agree with that statement.
Yeah, because like the first one is very much this trying to be X-Men film, where they're trying to be as grounded, as cool and edgy as possible. And then in the second one, he just goes full fucking Del Toro, and the overall story is absolutely terrible. But it's visually and creatively so interesting that it's really enjoyable. I've only watched the first one twice. I've watched the third one like 6 or 7 times. The second one, sorry. So yeah, anyways, so that was my pick. Again, I wouldn't say it's representative of Spanish cinema, and I wouldn't say it's the best of Spanish cinema. I could have gone with older films. I've grown up, the most of the Spanish films I have seen are actually in black and white. I've grown up with a lot of very old Spanish cinema, and it used to be really fucking amazing. We basically had Hollywood studios in Spain at some point in time.
Oh wow!
But history happens. Wars happen.
Was that because they shot a lot of westerns in Spain?
Yes, they shot a fuck ton of westerns in Spain. Most spaghetti westerns, as they are known, were actually not shot in Italy, but in Spain.
Yeah,
they were just directed.
I kind of love that. Just like Italian directors, Spanish, made in Spain.
Exactly.
I kind of love that cross country stuff.
So again, wouldn't say it's representative, but It is. It is a pick of a very recent. I say very recent. It's probably been 20 years or some shit.
2007.
Yeah.
2007,
Okay.
I think. 15 years.
15 years. But still, this is very much like a movie that I feel people can watch and enjoy, and hopefully get a little bit of Spanish in there.
Yeah,
it's not the
absolutely.
happy-go-lucky side of Spain that we know. It's not the resilient side of Spain. It's the tragic side of Spain. But it's honestly nowadays a history that we should very much remember, especially seeing how things are going. What just happened with the Italian elections? I feel like we should all remember this is no good.
Yes. Well, speaking of Italy, this is where my first pick is going to go.
Let's go.
Italy's had a really interesting film history, especially post-war. And that's when, of course, the iconic Italian neo-realism phase began. Was post-war Italy, when they were in economic and political turmoil and kind of lost as a country. And that's where you get these films that are really dealing with heavy realistic and heavy subject matter and stuff like that, like Umberto D and Bicycle Thieves and so on. But then post neo-realism, you had really two main iconic modernist filmmakers. One of them is more well known, and that's Federico Fellini, who did films like La Dolce Vita, and 8.5 is his most iconic film, and is considered one of the best directed films ever made. And it is. I was tempted to do 8.5 because I do love that film. It's it's a great film about a director who, in real life, was at a creatively bankrupt and didn't know what to do for his next film, so he made a film about a director who was creatively lost. I really love that.
It's a film within a film within a film. I like that.
Yeah, pretty much. But I'm actually going with Michelangelo Antonioni and his film La Notte, because... Well, I actually talked about Antonioni with my undergrad dissertation, so you could say this is a bit biased and fanboy-y, but
you've prepped for this episode quite thoroughly, is what you're saying.
But I didn't discuss about La Notte that much because I discussed more about other films, and actually some of his Western films, stuff like that, which blow up as one of my favourite films. But that is Italian film. That's once again Italian director, American produced, shot in London and starring a British actor.
Yes,
a whole cross-country thing. But
very international.
La Notte is probably it's in his modernist phase, and it's part of a loose trilogy which is connected by themes of alienation and love and so much.
Doesn't Lewis like his loosely connected trilogies?
Yes, I do love a loosely connected trilogy, and I may do one for my next country, by the way. But I think this is his most successful of the three, because they are very they're art house films, and they're films which have like long spaces of no dialogue and a lot of where a lot of symbolism and metaphorical stuff. But La Notte is, out of the three, probably the most stylish, the most cool. Has Marcello Mastroianni, who is like an iconic Italian actor, as well as Jean Moreau and Monica Vitti, who just passed away recently. And really, the story, what you have, so it's like the day in the life of basically a marriage that's falling apart. There is an unfaithful husband, and it's all sort of like, it begins with Marcello Mastroianni and Moreau going to see their friend who's dying in hospital, and you can make a whole thing, is that indicative of their dying marriage? Probably. And then from that morning moment, you go from like this bustling Milan, and you have this whole sort of odyssey of Moreau just wandering the streets and sort of lost as a person, and what should she do with her marriage. And then it all kind of leads into this. We begin, because La Notte just means the night, and you then go into the night, and it begins with this really stylish and sexy jazz number, with these like sort of erotic dancers and things like that, and then we kind of, where the main action takes place, and that is in this villa, with this sort of nonsensical and mad parties going on. And that was kind of a big thing in like La Dolce Vita and Fellini's La Dolce Vita 2, which is like, parties were a big thing in like these modernist filmmakers thing, and they're all really cool and great to look at. But why I'd recommend this so much is just because there is this not only is it super stylish and really well acted, there is this whole theme about, you know, what, like, this basically just sort of a story about the end of relationship and people and people basically having a last grasp and in some ways trying to sabotage their own relationship because they're so, you know, they're so dissatisfied with their self that you know, they have these people trying to sabotage their own love life. And Monica Vitti, who plays Valentina, she's sort of like the seductress to Mastroianni's Giovanni, and she has a really, really pivotal role in the film too. And out of that trilogy, she's sort of like, she's the main character in number 1 and number 3, but then in this one she takes the supporting role and is sort of meant to be sort of the
antagonist,
kind of antagonist of the film. But it's not really. It's more Giovanni because he's the one being
he's the one
tempted and stuff like that.
He's the
but yeah, it kind of goes on to it is a film that kind of, and I'll be talking about it later with something like Blonde, which kind of, you know, you have like the alienating male figure who's kind of caught between like a desire of, you know, a lustful desire and what to do with his own marriage and stuff like that. It's just a really, really stylish, interesting, kind of thought-provoking, really like beautiful film. I really love Lenotti. It's definitely the best part of that trilogy, and if you watch all 3 of them, they all connect through like alienations and people being really selfish in love lives and things like that.
It's a very human story.
Really, yes, very human story is a good way to put it. It's people coming to terms with their own failings as an individual, basically, but it's all dressed up in really glossy and fancy clothes.
Because everyone's wearing
that's why
like,
I really
suits
like
and
it.
nice dresses, and like it feels very elegant. You know, like especially for the times that it was shot at. You know.
Yes. Oh yeah. Like it's shot like monochrome and it looks beautiful, and it has a lot of actually. It's funny because Mastroianni, who did La Dolce Vita prior to this, there's a lot of the same sort of connections between his character in La Dolce Vita and in The Night. So there is a sort of, and that was a Fellini film, and then this was a Antonioni film. So there is weird connections, and I think that's why he cast Mastroianni, because he was like, well, I'm sort of like this is sort of like a spiritual successor to that character. It's really interesting, but it's a really cool film, and I would highly recommend it.
Wow.
And if you know, it's out there, it's different. It's not like a lot of films you'd see today. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that was and that was my first pick for Italy.
It's interesting because I've recently been forced to watch a lot of very, very old historically relevant films for my film course, and it's interesting to think that there was a time where the decision to use color or not to use it was one that was part of the identity of a film. You know, you see in that like early transition between color film and black and white, where like obviously doing things in color was slightly more costly. You see a lot of directors saying, hey, actually color is not going, like I'd rather play with like the whites and the blacks and the grays than go into designing. And then you see whenever they did use color, it was very much very deliberate, you know, even in films like a lot of very I keep using this word because I don't know if there's a word for it in English, but costumbrista, like human stories, like even if it's like a day-to-day tale, the idea of those colors and what they mean and how they signify to the story. And it's sad to see that in more mainstream films that is a thing that is being lost, and just color is just a thing that exists, and you don't think about it, you don't plan for it, you don't question it too much, you know. And it's interesting because of course, no, there are directors who do a fantastic job of this.
Yeah. I mean, there's directors, obviously, like, it's quite interesting you say it, because I think maybe it's just because it kind of became sort of mainstream when, like, Mad Max was like when George Miller was like, "Oh, I intended this to be black and white," which is always odd to me because I was like, "That's such a really colorful film and really vibrant." But then of course you had like Logan as well when James Mangold was like, "Oh, there's the noir version of this film," which I think is the right way to watch it.
Logan
and then like, Parasite.
Yeah. Thing is, I feel like when it comes to Mad Max, he wanted it to be black and white, and because he couldn't do it, like you can see that the use of color is incredibly intentional in that film. You know, like I feel like it feels that colorful because of that constraint that was put on it, you know, and I feel like that's
there is a black and white version.
And same with like Parasite is a very costume-based kind of film. I will use this term until it becomes a thing.
Okay, I'm glad.
It's a very costume-based kind of film, and it deals with like a very day-to-day. It wants to be very grounded. It doesn't want to be fantastical in any way. It wants to portray everyday things in a fantastical way, and then the exaggeration comes from how horrible the actions are and how like the extremes that the people go to, but not the reality that they inhabit. And it's interesting that even in a film like that, color is also used incredibly like meaningfully, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I got into this. I just started.
But actually, like Parasite as well. Like, there's a whole thing because in La Notte you have. Like, Antonio was always obsessed with architecture and using architecture as a way to sort of express feeling. And when it's shot in black and white, like white buildings really shine and can actually really
especially
pop.
In the night.
And same with like the edges of buildings that really you know, like you said, pop when they're shot in like black and white. And I think that was a thing in Parasite as well, where Bong Joon-ho made surfaces like really reflective and stuff like that, so that you could watch it in black and white, it adds a whole new sort of layer to that film, which I do need to do. I've actually not seen that film in black and white, but there is a version you can watch. But anyway, what is your second country?
Sorry, I went on this whole fucking rant. I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of
that's fine.
I'm rewatching a lot of like German expressionism at the moment, so like I'm very into like the use of like the very delivered use of dark and light in those kind of films. Have you ever seen M?
Yes, I've seen it.
Okay, that movie is so much better than I expected. That was a fucking master. Like, not only because obviously it's a masterpiece of its time, but I think it's not only a masterpiece of its time, but it holds up surprisingly well, given that like it came 7 years?
1934?
Yeah, because it was like 7 years after fucking the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and it's like, holy shit, dude, that was like, you literally were just doing theater 5 years ago, and now you just... Oh, sorry.
It's quite crazy how fast cinema evolved.
It's incredible.
In the 20th century.
Absolutely
and now it's
incredible.
Kind of... It's slowed down exponentially, but
but it's especially given the circumstances that these artists were working under at the time. This was the worst of times, and yet they kept pushing and evolving the medium in such incredible ways. Honestly, sorry. So second pick.
I was like, oh, is he going to do Germany? But no, he's not.
No. I'm not going to do M. But if you haven't seen M, and you're like, oh, it's so old, it came out literally in the last century, I don't think I want to watch this, but just fucking watch it. It's incredible. It's one of those films that you should watch with someone, just so you can spend 5 hours talking about the message and metaphor of that film right afterwards. And it's kind of depressing if you think about it within its historical context, because it's predicting a world that then... You know, but same with everything. Okay. Anyway, so my second pick, another cop out. So this is going to be I'm picking New Zealand, and I'm not doing the Lord of the Rings. Do not worry, it's fine. We've talked about this before. I don't actually enjoy those films as much.
You're not a big fan of Lord of the Rings trilogy.
They're good, but they're not my favorite. But. I'm going to pick Taika Waititi's Hunt for the Wilder People.
Yes. Probably
his best film.
It's one of his, but your favorite is his films.
100%. In my opinion, his best film. Not that it's that much of a competition, really. He's got really good films, but the opposite. It's a very tough competition. I'm very tired.
I don't know. I think Hunt for the Wilder People and What We Do in the Shadows are.
Yeah.
I think those two are just. I don't know. I think those are
Yes.
his best films, quite simply.
Yes.
Yes.
What We Do in the Shadows is just an experience, and I am surprised with the incredible quality of the spin-off show. Honestly, did not.
Yeah, because I when they announced that, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, exactly. I was like,
They're doing a
oh,
spin-off
they're
show
gonna
of that,
fuck it up, and it's absolutely fantastic. But okay,
fantastic.
so Hunt for the Wilder People. This is I picked this one because even though again it's an English-speaking country and it's a director that has worked with Hollywood, I think it was after this film that he worked with Hollywood, not
Yes,
beforehand.
yes, he was still. Yeah,
So
New
he was
Zealand
still
doing this,
yeah. So but at the same time, this is a very New Zealand film. I feel like it I haven't been to New Zealand. I know very little about the culture, but this film feels like it takes place in New Zealand, and like it feels like it's soaked with that culture. It feels like it couldn't be told this story anywhere else. It's an incredibly touching comedy. Because I would
No, I know. Yeah.
yeah, it follows the tradition of the dramatic comedy basically. It
Yes,
manages to
It has a opening that's not like
Hmm.
too dissimilar to something like Up.
yeah,
Um,
very much.
if you get me, although it's not like done in like
No,
there's
no,
no
not in the same
dialogue
way,
and
but
it's
I
a
know
big
what you
musical
mean, yeah.
sequence, but yeah.
It's the story of two people that are very different and do not really have a very strong relationship, getting closer after something that they share happens, like, and through grief and their shared grief, they start getting closer together and finding that familial bond. And it's incredible. It's absolutely fantastic. Honestly, I did not expect to enjoy this movie as much as I did, but I must have watched it 4 or 5 times, which is surprising given how tough some of those scenes are, emotionally. And it's absolutely incredible. I feel like Taika Waititi writes the line between tragedy and comedy fantastically in this film. I know something that he's been criticized for before in certain films where he couldn't quite get the tone right. This film,
Yes.
absolutely brilliant. I think the tone is perfect. He deals with it absolutely perfectly, and the performances of the two main characters
Oh yes, yeah.
are.
I mean, Sam Neill. Oh,
Oh
I think
my
this. Well, I
God.
think this. Well, from what this is Sam Neill's best performance, I would say.
I haven't
Um,
seen him in a lot, but 100%, especially after having seen Jurassic World 3 this summer. A movie where he was just
Oh,
like, I guess, having
I'll
fun with
show
some
up.
old
I'll do
friends.
it.
He
Yeah.
seemed like he was having just a good time fooling around with some old friends, not knowing very much what the fuck was going on. This one, though, he is absolutely incredible. Like, holy shit. And what's the name of the co-star? God damn it. The actual protagonist of the film.
Oh yes, yes, yes. The kid who was in
Yes, in
Deadpool
Deadpool
2.
2.
His name's Ricky,
Yes.
or the actor's name. Sorry, is Gillian Dennison.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Oh man, Julian absolutely like nails his performance. Like it's incredible how like both how much of an asshole he can be and how incredibly likable
Oh yeah,
he can
yeah.
be. And
I
even
think that was like a thing because they cast him in Deadpool 2 because of his like
yes,
comedic
yes.
chops in this film,
100%.
and I think in that film he comes across as annoying, but
Yes.
in Hunt for the Wilder People is far more endearing.
Yes, which
But
feels
that's just because
like
his
an issue
character
with
is
the
just
with both the
uh,
writing and the direction.
yeah.
Because honestly, that's one of those films where like it's hard sometimes going to films without like any preconceptions, but that's one of those films where I enjoyed it more because I already liked I already liked his character because I liked him, you know. Even if he was completely unbearable in that one. But then even Rima Te Wiata, which is how I'm choosing to pronounce that, I am not
Yeah,
sure
fair.
that's how you pronounce it. I'm still not sure if Waititi is how you pronounce his surname. But anyways, I am bad at pronunciation.
Yeah, we'll go with it.
But she fucking nails it. She's not in the movie for that long, but she is very much the heart of this film. And without her, she's essential. I feel like if she didn't do as good a job as she did with her character and writing that line, it's really hard to talk about this without spoiling it. But
you can spoil it if you want. We can put a spoiler warning.
Oh no, I don't want to spoil this one. I feel like I've already spoiled it enough by saying certain things. But her performance is absolutely breathtakingly fantastic, and she is the glue that holds this movie together. I feel. Watch it; it's incredible. What's the name of the lady who plays the police officer? Not the police officer, the fucking child protective services officer. She's in Thor as well.
Yeah, she appeared in Thor Ragnarok as well, didn't she?
She is fucking incredible. She's the most hilarious. Oh my god, she basically played the same character.
Rachel House. Rachel House is the actress's name.
She is brilliant, and I want her to be in every single comedy from here till the end of time, because that woman makes me laugh like nobody else. But yeah, that's my pick, Hunt for the Wilder People. I know you enjoyed this one as well, Lewis.
I do. I think, I mean, I've had problems with Waititi as a director, but like you said, tonal things like Thor and Jojo Rabbit, I think those two films don't really work. But in these early stages of his career, I thought that's when he, like you said, he wrote that line really well. And Hunt for the Wild People is just charming and funny and really heartfelt. And I think Taika Waititi has a great cameo in it too. It's one of the times where his cameo is not just like, oh, here he is. It's a very when he plays a preacher or something.
It's very much in character kind of thing. It's very fun. And it's again one of those things that actually with Taika's career, it's interesting because I started following him after that movie. And he's had hits and misses also outside of Hollywood. But honestly, this is 100% a hit. Fantastic film. Go watch it. Honestly, just go watch Hunt for the Wilder People. I know it's available on Netflix in a couple of countries. I don't know about but like VPN sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've got the Blu-ray of it, so I could just.
That's perfect. I got it on DVD.
For my next pick, I was kind of struggling where to go, right? Because I wanted to. France was obviously France has an incredible history of cinema. He was born there.
Yeah, we could literally do Méliès, and it would still be fair,
But then my favourite French film, which is A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I already talked about on when me and Kyle did a recommendations episode. So if you want to hear me, gush about that film, Celine Sciamma. Celine Sciamma is one of the best working directors today. She's just brilliant, and that is an absolute modern romance classic. So please check that out. It's my favourite French film that I've ever seen.
Does she have any
it only came out 3
films?
years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, does she have any upcoming projects?
She released Petite Maman last year, which is another great film, which has this. It's all about sort of child fantasy and dealing with how sort of the child mind, sort of similar to Pan's Labyrinth, but it's family friendly. It's and sort of the child mind sort of deals with problems facing them in their life right now, and it has this interesting time travel thing. But is it really time travel? It's a whole interesting, it's a really tender and beautiful film. That's a great one. Girlhood as well, which it's set in Paris and is more like documentary realistic style. Another good one. But Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Absolutely watch that. And I was tempted, like I said, with the Loose trilogy thing, to do Park Chan-wook's Revenge trilogy, which famously has Old Boy as part of it. But I was Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is a really overlooked beginning film in that trilogy, which ends in Lady Vengeance.
That's odd because out of his trilogy, I have only watched the Old Boy one, and I didn't even know he had a trilogy. That's how Yeah.
Like I said, loosely thematic trilogy, all about revenge.
Yes.
But Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is really overlooked, and is strangely, it's really dark, but kind of darkly funny at the same time. It's a very, very bizarre film, but absolutely loved that film. But I'm actually going to go for Denmark, right? Because I know Kyle would have liked to have done Denmark as well, so I'm going to do
where I am right now.
And where you are right now, Gonzalo, and like I said, like with Italy, Denmark had an interesting movement in the late 90s, and that was spearheaded by Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg, and it's called the Dogma 95, and it had these vows that they had to follow, and it's rules of cinema. And I'll just read out to you what these rules were. So the rules were to create films based on traditional values of story, acting, and theme, and excluding the use of elaborate special effects or technology. Ooh. It was supposedly created as an attempt to take back power for the directors as artists, as opposed to the studio. So that was the point of the Dogma 95. And I'm going to be looking at Thomas Vinterberg's 2012 film The Hunt, which stars Mads Mikkelsen. Have you heard of this film, Gonzalo, The Hunt?
I have heard of this film. I haven't watched it.
You have heard of it?
But I have heard.
You have watched it. It follows Mads Mikkelsen, who plays Lucas, and he's a divorcee, and he just sort of like has shares custody with his son, and he is a teacher who teaches at a primary school, and then one day, one of the little girls in the class claims that Lucas touched her. And so from that accusation, you then have a man whose life sort of spirals out of control. And from that, it's quite interesting because it's not specifically a horror film by any means. It's like, it's filmed realistically and doesn't really, like the Dogma has, nothing really too crazy or experimental in it. But the undertones of this film and the way you watch this man's life fall apart from a lie is so tragic and hard to watch that in many ways it kind of is a horror film. You watch basically a community turn against him and how it affects obviously his relationship with his son, and how it affects his mental health and all these things, and it's so engrossing, but it's really hard to watch. It's so interesting.
Yeah, like staring at a car crash where like you want to stop watching, and you also keep watching. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a film which made me had so much anger towards a 6-year-old child.
Wow.
Because you're like, it's genuinely quite a harrowing experience, but. Mads Mikkelsen, of course, I mean, he's one of the best working actors today, delivers this really, really hard performance, of course, because you have to really show this transformation and a really slow decline in sort of your mental health, and obviously you're trying to urge people, tell people that this is nonsense, this didn't happen, and then you're watching just a tragedy unfold. And the way the film ends as well, which I won't spoil here, but the way the film ends is really brilliant, and it sort of, puts a pin on like what this sort of accusation can do to a person, and sort of the long-standing implications of it. But like I said, it's genuinely, it can be a hard watch, but it's thoroughly entertaining, and I wouldn't say it's Vinterberg's best film, but it's one that. It's probably his more famous one, because Another Round came out last year, which was one of my favourite films of last year. Another film which I'd really recommend, which has a lot of similar cast, Mads Mikkelsen starring again. And
I mean, when you can get Mads Mikkelsen, why get anyone else?
Yes, exactly, and that too is sort of like it's interesting because that's two sort of similar thematics to The Hunt, where you're sort of watching. lives sort of spiral out of control, but in a very different way, because that film is about what if we become, it's like the human body is actually, we actually need like a very small percentage of alcohol in our bloodstream to maintain happiness, and the sort of these people who go on this experiment, but of course things go wrong, and that's another absolutely brilliant Winterberg film. So that's sort of a double bill for you, is The Hunt and Another Round. Yes, so
do not
Denmark,
combine both.
So Danish,
if you're going hunting, do not drink.
No. So I was like, I think I'll join these two together, sort of cheating.
Nice.
But I think Lars von Trier, I mean, he was part of that Dogma thing. He's a far more divisive filmmaker. He did films like Nymphomaniac and things like that, and Antichrist. But I'd say he's more of a global filmmaker. He's one who kind of reaches out to and films things in other countries and has more, Western stars and things like that.
I'm interested in this
Another
kind of,
Round
list
and
of
The Hunt.
rules. This is interesting. I'm gonna look into like the Dogma 95 manifesto and what like their rules and their goals are, because like shooting must be done on location. Props and sets must not be brought in. If a particular prop is necessary for the story, a location must be chosen where the prop is to be found. The sound must never
very
be
strict. Very strict.
Super fucking strict. The sound must never be produced apart from the images, or vice versa. Music must not be used unless it occurs where the scene is being shot. So no.
And that does remind me of a really great scene in The Hunt where there's this a Christmas choir going on, which adds another level of this haunting sort of atmosphere that surrounds Lucas's life. Yeah, guys, watch The Hunt. It's on Amazon Prime right now. I know that. Another Round. Don't know where you can really get that, but
so
check
it's
them out.
so I'm curious because like you've seen this movie, and by reading like this big list, it very much seems like the only thing that's really produced is the camera movement and the acting. Everything else seems to be like more in situ, kind of like the idea of like more documentary style, even though like the actions and things are rehearsed, So I was wondering if that adds anything to the movie, specifically, like if you've ever felt like, if you feel like it adds anything, or if it feels more like a creative constraint just to push the director rather than, directly affecting the viewer.
That's interesting, because I think you and I have talked about before how like somehow constraints are a good thing if you don't have limitless options, because then you're constantly going to be thinking of what was the right decision, what was the right way to go, and I think restraints is. I think that's a good way to put it. It must be like, I think these are just regimented rules to probably focus their films, and like you said, films have. You always go on about the thesis thing.
Always. That's going to be my thing. If we ever do merch, it's just going to be my face and the word thesis.
Thesis. And I think because those films have such really, like, they're very focused stories, and it probably does come down to the restraints they're putting in place. And when you watch it, it's like realistic. Like it looks like, but it still looks like a movie, but it's realistic looking. So it doesn't really hinder in that sense, because you have like I was talking about Girlhood, Celine Sciamma's thing, that looks really borderline documentary because it's so raw. Whereas I think The Hunt and Another Round still have just like they must just be lit in just the right way that still sort of looks cinematic.
So you feel then that it's more like an effect on the way the movie is produced, and like to facilitate a very kind of like limited kind of like way of filmmaking, rather than to give a specific effect to like the outcome, right?
But it's so interesting because even in these constraints, they're sort of telling interesting stories, like Another Round, where it's like we need to have this percentage of alcohol in our blood at all times to be happy. You're having this really interesting story, but you aren't going because really, if you have like you have everything at your disposal, you could kind of go in sort of crazy routes with that, with like I don't know, mad effects with like beer goggle cameras and sort of that sort of.
So it's like this fantasy through story rather than fantasy through visuals kind of idea, right?
Yes, it must be
telling outlandish things, but without like relying on visual story, like not visual storytelling, but like making outlandish visuals, but using the way you shoot, the way you tell the story, the way you edit, the way you act, to tell those kind of like more surreal experiences. That's interesting, honestly. It seems like an interesting movement. Yeah.
It is interesting because, like you were going about these constraints, but a major theme of Another Round is being able to be free and sort of, find your sort of best version of yourself is a major part of that film. Because when you get to Mads Mikkelsen's character at the start of the film, basically his marriage is in a rut and he's just really unhappy and his students don't like him because he's playing a teacher in that film as well. His students don't like him. Yeah. He must be typecast then with Winterberg.
Oh, he's a teacher.
No, that's it. He's either a villain or he's a teacher. That seems to be Mads Mikkelsen's two roles.
That's really funny.
But that's sort of interesting how like within that is it really just solely focuses on the character and the character journey and sort of through a realistic lens you're watching a man sort of slowly become free or trying to find the right pattern in his life to be happy, and that's a major part of that film.
That's interesting because like it could mirror like the idea of the director trying to find a movie within these oppressive constraints that are like pushing him to do something that's more, again, going to use this word again until it becomes popular, kostymbrist. Yes, that's the literal, that's going to be the English word from now on. I genuinely need to Google this to see if it's an actual fucking word.
You do.
Yeah. But yeah,
for
like,
my sake as well.
It's interesting, the idea of like the movie reflects that kind of like, hey, I'm being forced into this mold. Let's find a way to be myself within these oppressive constraints. That's pretty awesome.
Another Round also has a sad personal story to it because Winterberg lost his daughter during the filming of Another Round, and it became a very personal project to him as well. But look, Another Round was one of my favourite films of last year. I mean, if you want to look at my top, I've got a little review of it on unwantedopinion.net if you want to read that. That was a shameless plug, I don't care. But Another Round and The Hunt should definitely be watched. But that will kind of round off our discussion on world cinema. I mean, look, we didn't really cover the world. We went to a few continents, but
we're gonna have to do more episodes of this, just to, if nothing else, to force me to watch more world cinema.
This was definitely more of an introductory thing, just to sort of gush over some films that aren't Hollywood based, and I'm sure we'll cover different continents and things in the future.
Could go anywhere. I mean, you've already shown your appreciation, growing appreciation for a specific Japanese director, the one from the car one. God damn it.
Yes, Hamaguchi.
Yes, Hamaguchi. Yes. So you definitely have a ton of incredible international films and directors in your back pocket, ready to go. So yeah, hopefully there's another one of these. And we're missing Kyle, and I'd love to hear
I'm sure
his take on international cinema
as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But now it's time. Now it's time for reviews.
And now, reviews.
So, I'll begin with a review for Kogonada's After Yang. So, about 5 years ago now, Kogonada made his directorial debut. He was known to be like a documentary filmmaker and sort of made visual film essays. That was sort of who he was. But then he sort of broke out with this fantastic film, Columbus, in 2017. Which I don't know if I've talked about on the show. I think I may have referenced or talked about it a couple times. But Columbus, I thought, is just one of the most peaceful and just really meditative films of the last few years. I thought it was just a really, really beautiful watch, and I loved it, and since then Kogonada's been put on the map for me, and this is his sophomore effort after Yang. So it's set in the near future where Jake, who's played by Colin Farrell, and his wife Kyra, who's played by Jodie Turner-Smith, they're raising their adopted daughter Mika, who's played by Malia Emma, I may butcher this name, I do apologise, Chandra Wijaya, and basically they have to help assist with looking after their daughter. They have an android assistant who's Yang, played by Justin Heachman. But then one day, strangely, after a really fun and wild dance opening, which was really, really visually interesting, after this sort of little dance they do, Yang just breaks down, and soon the film becomes about this family having to come to terms with the loss of Yang, and suddenly they discover he had secrets in his own life, and through uncovering some secrets, this whole film becomes a story about, you know, the nature of memory and sort of our connections to people once they've gone, and sort of the multifaceted nature of life. It's a really, really all-encompassing, beautiful film. This is an absolutely fantastic follow-up to Columbus, I think. Even on this aesthetic level, the sci-fi world is both kind of like earthy and homely, but also there is this invasive quality to it with Colin Farrell's character, who's sort of like, who just considers Yang as like a servant, like he's an android, and doesn't really consider much of him at first. No, he considers him part of the family, but he's sort of, you know, he's sort of like just an asset, really. Like,
exactly.
He's helping out. He's looking after my daughter.
Yeah, same way like your blender's part of the family.
Yeah, like your butler or something. But then all that relationship gets all kind of reconsidered, you know, post his death, and I really love this aspect of the film where they have flashbacks looking back at sort of like some conversations between Jake and Yang and Kyra and Yang, and how through this sort of like looking back and just remembering someone, how we can realize we had stronger connections and a really tender relationship with someone, more than we actually even realized when they were here. And that's a really, really, really lovely aspect of the film. And there's also this whole play with memory and stuff, and how important is memory to being, to our being and the self. And look, I would say, just on the filmmaking basis, it's a really still yet really aesthetically interesting and beautiful looking film. Colin Farrell is restrained, but his performance really builds because he's a character going on a discovery and discovering who Yang really was, and through these discoveries, like, Farrell's able to sort of portray profundity in a really great way, and his character evolves and his performance evolves to the film, and he's fantastic. He really is. I mean, Colin Farrell, what a year he's had already with like the Batman and this, and he's got the Banshees of Inisherin coming out, so he's already having a great year. The little girl who plays Mika as well, she adds a little bit of humour to the film, a little bit of child glee and innocence, which is great to see, and she's just someone who Yang was like a brother to her, and she just wants her brother back, and it's a really, really, really tender relationship they have. On the negative side, there's very little I think I could have done with more of Kyra. I think she is sort of sidelined in the film a bit. Definitely more of a supporting role, and there is that great interaction like I talked about in the past, but I think maybe a little bit more of her would have just elevated the film a little bit. I mean, it's short, it's only an hour and a half. I mean, they could have done with an extra 5-10 minutes, I think. So just to sort of add that.
This is one of the few times I've ever heard anyone say, "Hey, that movie could have been slightly longer."
yeah, I had to think so.
That's definitely a good sign. Yeah.
There's a great score by Asuka Matsumaya, which has this. I mean, I've actually listened to the score again because it's really great. And there's this song "Hold My Breath," which is a great track. But yeah, overall, it's just such a human story at the end of the day. It's something that was the same in Columbus, how there was definitely about the connections between the human and the aesthetic, and there was that here too. But it is really just, it's so multifaceted, and in that short runtime it asks so many questions about what it means to be human, like our memories, how integral they are to us as beings, and sort of our connections to those who are lost. It really is a great film, and I'm giving this a strong 9 out of 10. Kogonada's 2 for 2 in terms of films. Yeah,
you've sold me on this one. Damn. I already liked the science fiction proposal, because I feel like, and I've said this in the past, but I feel like science fiction is less of a genre and more a way to explore humanity through extremes. And by your description, this is exactly what I look like in a sci-fi film. So I'm 100% on board.
It's a really interesting depiction of like the near future they have. I mean, there's this great thing where they call them androids are called techno-sapiens, and like that's just so clever. I love that just like they're techno-sapiens and sort of understanding how they're evolving and things like that. It's a really I think there's also like odes, like some visual cues to like Blade Runner and stuff like that, which is obviously of course, because that obviously is all about humanity in itself as well.
I was going to say the story itself really reminds me, because I've been reading this recently, of Asimov's first tale in the iRobot series, I guess. I mean, it's stories within a narrative kind of thing, but basically the first story, which is the story of a nanny robot, basically a robot that takes care of a child, and the relationship that they develop together, and what happens after the robot is gone, and how the family reacts to the loss of the robot, which is interesting because it's very much that same kind of idea.
Sorry, who was the author? Who was the author again?
Isaac Asimov. Is that how you pronounce that?
Because I know this is actually After Yang is based off a short story, but it's not by him.
No, it's not exactly. It's not exactly the same, because in this story, overall the book is about the idea of humanity's reaction to intelligent robots, and how basically they fuck it up. To put it mildly, and the lack of empathy and understanding that is projected to the robots, and how slowly throughout time they push the robots away into being workers in space, far from interacting with humanity, because of how uncomfortable that interaction becomes. And this first story is very much about that, but again, the parents are the ones who end up deciding to just throw the robot away, and it's the child that sees this robot as a human, as like a friend, as she can see.
I'm
the
sure there was
humanity
definitely inspiration.
Oh, I'm 100%
from the sounds of
I
it.
mean, we're talking about like one of the most influential sci-fi authors of all time. FYI, his writing is absolutely atrocious and incredibly hard to get through. He's like he's that kind of writer who loves his technical descriptions, and oh my god, his prose is horrific and I absolutely hate it, but his ideas are fantastic.
He's got some good ideas, that kid.
No, that's the thing. Like, it generally, if I could adapt the iRobots into like a TV anthology, I would, because the philosophical themes in it are fantastic. I do. It has nothing to do with the
Yes. I know. I was just thinking that. I was like, robot films.
It's kind of the fucking opposite of the book, actually, because it's a society where everyone accepts robots except this one guy. This is the opposite. It's like nobody accepts robots. They fucking hate robots. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. 100% would adapt that into like a nice high budget anthology. Where's the budget, people? Just call me. Netflix, I got an idea for you. I don't own the IP. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but please call me.
As long as it's based off an IP, you'd get it funded. It's fine.
You're fine, exactly. You're fine.
Netflix would absolutely pick up. But yes, After Yang, 9 out of 10. Check out. I think it's now available on Sky Cinema here in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Might
be on HBO.
It was released in America. It was released in cinemas for a limited time and released in America way back in spring. But I don't know where. I don't know where it's available in Denmark. I'm sorry, Gonzalo. Try and find it.
I'll look. I'll look for it. Don't worry.
But yeah, now it's time for a review of Blonde, which is it's one of the most, if not one of it is the most divisive and controversial film released this year that I've seen. It's one which is, Twitter and social media has been an uproar about it. There has been debate, there has been harsh criticism of it, and some few, critics actually did enjoy it and things like that. But because basically what Blonde is It's an adaptation of a book of the same name, which by Joyce Carol Oates, which is a fictitious reconstruction of Marilyn Monroe / Norma Jean's life. So it's to get that out of the way, and I think this is a major problem that people are sort of maybe expecting going into this, is that this is a true to life biopic of Marilyn Monroe / Norma Jean's life. It is not, absolutely not. There is. This is a biopic. I mean, we did our biopics episode ages ago, months ago, didn't we, Gonzalo? And this is definitely on the more experimental and psychological character study biopic that is taking a real life figure and it does depict some real life things that did happen, of course, but really looks at the psyche of the character and
the same way you would if you did a biopic on, I guess, like Julius Caesar. Like, you'd probably hit some of the famous points, but everything else you fucking make up, kind of. Yeah.
But even with some of the famous points, like some of the movies being made and like premieres and things like that, there is definitely more of a lot of fiction, a lot more of experimental filmmaking going here, and it's very akin to last year's Spencer, which took the life of Diana Spencer. Sorry, I forgot her name for a second. How could I? Princess Diana's like, and it covered like 3 days of her life, which was completely made up. I mean, who knows if any of it could have ever happened? But really,
a lot of people. There was also like a lot of backlash for Spencer as well, because a lot of people went in thinking it was a straightforward biopic retelling, where it was very much an experimental horror movie. Actually,
it was a ghost story. Really, I mean, that was a film which looked at just the sort of the psyche of Diana and sort of took real life incidents and real life facts and her feelings
to inspire
during her life at this time, to inspire and sort of uncover like what was she feeling during this time. And this is very similar to that, I will say. But
it's interesting because I've heard more, like the only reason I've heard about this movie is the controversy around this movie.
Yes. So basically, going in looking at it purely as a biopic is probably a futile effort. This is not covering. This is not a documentary. This is not a book. This is not something that is covering. It's not like Elvis, I guess, which is a film which sort of was a celebration of that man, and just kind of hit the beats. Hit the the iconic beats of his career, and then it ends with his death, of course. It's not a traditional
that's
biopic.
More of a stylized Wikipedia article.
Yes, pretty much. Like I said in that thing, and even with that, because I think people are already having a problem with this film because it's not one that truly celebrates her achievements, Monroe's achievements, like something like Elvis. Just it's purely a celebration of that man. But I think that film falters by not, challenging
the faults of the human,
its central character and its faults of Elvis. I mean, we talked about how it completely overlooks his relationship with Priscilla, who he met when she was 14, and more uncomfortable subject matter because it was a film trying to celebrate the man. And I guess it's a different biopic. There's nothing like really wrong with that.
Like Robert Downey Jr.'s Chaplin, which is very much these are all the fantastic things that he did throughout his life, and again ignoring all the horrific things that also happened. It's more of a celebration of a figure. Sorry, yes.
Yes. No, I've already sort of skirted around this without actually going into it. But really, within the film's opening sequence, Andre Dominik, who directed the film, and also he's done strange biopics in the past, which are more like psychological and really fictitious, like the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, I think. It's a really long title. I can't remember if it was Robert or something else. He's done like that, and Chopper as well, which is a very strange biopic with Eric Bana.
The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. There you go.
Thank you, I was right. But already from the opening, that you already get this is not a normal biopic. It's strange. It's experimental. You have photographs that talk while a lone figure sits at a piano, and soon after a fire is raging indoors, but the neighbors don't seem to notice that there is a fire happening next. Like, they open the door and there's a fire there, and they don't seem to see it. You already know something. This is not normal, and that sort of experimental energy carries on throughout the film. This is a film which shifts from black and white to colour on a dime, just sort of randomly. Occasionally you'll be like, okay, we're in black and white now, we're in colour. Aspect ratios change all the time. You have these fluid dynamic cuts which goes from like a sex scene which is actually shot through abstracted reflections of metal, which then goes into an orgasm, which then cuts and fluid cuts into a waterfall, which is then the film Niagara starring Marilyn Monroe. Really interesting and strange directorial choices, which I think work for the most part, but there is somewhere I think he takes it too far. But at the centre of this, you have an Ana de Armas performance which is really transformative and really brave, a really, really strong performance, and one of the best of the year so far that I've seen.
Wow.
I mean, you have someone who's not just she's playing Norma Jean, who's playing the icon Marilyn Monroe, who's then in some sequences is playing a character. So you have Ana de Armas who's playing going to different layers of a character, which is really impressive. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, and it's more than just impression as well. Like it's a really interesting performance. But I think the film's greatest strength is its depiction of Monroe as something otherworldly, a person that actually did not exist. And I think this is the really interesting part, is that Marilyn Monroe didn't really exist.
No, she wasn't real, of course.
And I think this comes down to, if you're trying to do a Marilyn Monroe biopic, this would be the problem. Because Marilyn Monroe is already is not just a pop culture icon of timeless stature. She's someone who meant so much to different people and different people at different times, whose life is already still kind of, even though there's countless books and stories written about her, there's still so much that is unclear and still mysterious. And I think trying to tell a truly honest biopic of her life already invites challenge, because there's so much interpretation surrounding her life already.
Yeah.
But with this film, Monroe
it's kind of honest that he didn't even attempt it.
Yeah, Monroe is an otherworldly figure who, literally in a point in the film, has to be summoned by Monroe and her makeup artist, who someone's like, she's coming, don't worry, she's going to be here soon. Really eerie and creepy stuff, by the way, which we talked about the psychological aspects of Don't Worry Darling last week, but this is the dark stuff that I kind of wanted to see in that film.
I'm excited.
Where actually a film like Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me was even evoked in this, where you have like a shrieking and really operatic main performance, as well as like there's some really eerie scenes which reminded me of Lynch and that film. But Monroe is something that's sort of created as an entity, as a means to survive and progress in a career, as someone who is sort of the centre of the ogling of men and is completely objectified,
like
and
both,
the male gaze.
Both a survival mechanism and a sickness.
Yes, really. Something that she has to become in order to, sort of dupe men and studio heads into, giving her parts and things like that. Because there's a really interesting scene where early in her career in this film, I've got to always put in caveats in this film.
Yes.
She is auditioning for a part which she feels really connected to. It's a mentally ill character, because her mum was mentally ill, and that's actually a true fact of real life. And she felt connected to this character, and you have this great scene where Ana de Armas is, play as Norma Jean, is giving this really, revealing performance and a tear-jerking one at that, and she's just reading the lines and reading the script with a screen partner, and then she's asked to leave the audition, and once she leaves the room, the men immediately turn and go, "What the hell was that? What was that? Like, why is she acting like a mental patient, even though that's sort of the character description?" And then they ask one of the studio heads, "Oh, what did you think of it?" And he just immediately goes, "Would you look at that ass?" Like, that's what he takes away from it. And that's the whole thing. Like, every guy in this film is painted as someone who objectifies her, or someone who can't love her, or doesn't really understand her. And I think that's also true to the real life person, is that she was someone who was misunderstood, someone who was purely loved on a superficial level, but never truly loved. And And I just think that objectification stuff, and there is a lot of, nudity, there is a lot of sex scene, there is, depictions of abuse and rape. It's really heavy, heavy stuff. It's a really dark and sad film, but it's a tragedy at the end of the day. And look, I understand people have big problems with these sort of things, but I think they're saying it disrespects Monroe, and I don't agree. Not only because this isn't a real thing, and okay, people might go, well, why even bother using Monroe if it's not a real story? But I'm like, yes, but using someone of the stature of Monroe, who also went through these horrible traumatic events, was still able to have one of the most iconic careers in such a short amount of time, is something beyond astounding. And I actually think a lot of the things people have problems with, like the objectification stuff and the abuse things, is something that not only makes her, in this film, makes her a really tragic character, but also acts as a great companion piece to her real life films, and something where you watch this and go, wow, she went through all this horrible stuff and was still managed to achieve these great films and was an immense talent. It also helps that this film is gorgeous to look at as well. It's beautifully shot and has the best score of the year by
That's a claim.
oh my god, I forgot his name there. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, which has I've actually there's the last track of the film, where when the film ends, which of course ends, spoilers, Marilyn Monroe dies and it ends on that note, and you have where the credits sort of rush to. It's basically the end credits aren't just darkness, it's like the stars and stuff like that. It's, of course, she was a star, and it's like that's how the credits are unfolded. It's like the credits are going through the stars, and there's this great piece. I can't remember the name of it now. I have to actually look at the soundtrack. There's this great piece. It's called A World of Light. There you go. Of course, you're looking at stars. A World of Light.
Yes.
That is just so transcendent, and that score sort of plays throughout the whole film, and it's just, and at perfect points as well. The score becomes really haunting and really uncomfortable and eerie, especially in film, in moments where the iconic scene where like you see her dress get blown up, which is, an iconic image. Everyone has seen that image of her dress being blown up by the subway grate. Instead, that moment is depicted as something really eerie and quite haunting, because you then have, it's all done in like slow motion. You get these close-ups of these slobbering, sweaty men, and it's all played with this great score. And it's a genuinely,
because
I'm gushing over the score, but it is a really fantastic piece of music.
I wanted to ask you, because you've said that lots of people seem to be having an issue, and I've heard this with like the idea of the objectification in this movie. Do you think the film does a good job of putting you in her shoes as the victim of this objectification, or do you think it falls short and like objectifies her accidentally while trying to talk about her objectification? I mean, you've already answered, but
I know. I, like I said, I think the objectification stuff is done in a really, in some cases, really disturbing and a really creepy sequences, and it's obviously just reflective of the men that are obviously,
But that's the thing. Does it make you
as purely
a
participant?
Does it make you a participant in that objectification, or does it make you does it make you complicit in it, or does it make you a victim within it? If that makes any sense.
I think definitely the latter. I think a lot of people will disagree with that point. People think it's objectification purely for the sake of objectification, but it's sort of like you said, with sort of this Inception quality to it, where it's like, she was an objectified sex icon, was Marilyn Monroe. But I think the way it's done, especially like the sequences I just said, but I think people are sort of getting hung up on perhaps there is a lot of nudity in this film, and perhaps people are, well, that's not necessary in some things, and like the rape sequences. There is two main scenes. I mean, one is short and brief at the start, which is her being raped by a studio executive, and then one later on in the film. But what it does, it's interesting because within the second one, it then becomes sort of out of body experience, where then Norma Jean's sort of reflecting on who is really doing this right now. Is it Marilyn? Is it Norma? Is it something else? It becomes a really sort of it's cerebral and sort of psychedelic, strange experience for the viewer.
Yeah,
And I think because I think purely for me, why I don't think it's objectification just purely for like I'm not a participant in it is because the depiction is always shrouded with sadness or pain, and pain is a major aspect of this film, and I never felt like it was being used to arouse. There's actually only one consensual sex scene in the film, and it's a really actually because look, people can argue about what's the necessity of sex scene films. You know, that's an age-old question, really. But there is this really important sex scene which happens sort of earlier on in the film where it's Norma Jean feeling comfortable with these men and feeling comfortable that she can open up sexually with them, and it's something that acts as, you know, like something that completely juxtaposes the other sequences of sex in the film, and it's like, well, that actually really meant something to her as a character, and whereas the others were, you know, not consensual. But look, there is, I would say, like,
because that's interesting. Because like, I recently watched Fleabag season 1, and it's really interesting to me.
Great
how sex is portrayed in that specific show. Like the idea of portraying sex in a way that is incredibly not arousing in any word. It's never like you're looking at a sexy scene. It's just sex is happening. You know, and and it's one of these things. And again, I know this is a conversation we would not be having if Cal was here, but the way sex is portrayed in films, I feel like we're subjected to a lot of just flat out objectification of sex, or even just sex as just like this is as arousal, basically, like the idea of this is supposed to be arousing, this is supposed to be aesthetic, this is supposed to be, and it's interesting to like try to understand what how to portray something that is inherently sexual in a way that condemns it while portraying it, you know? And that's what I was wondering to see your opinion on, because again, like the main thing that I've heard about this film is the controversy of it, and I feel like it like if what it wanted to do is put you in her shoes, make you understand what she was going through, like a way of not shooting it and like filming it in a way that isn't arousing, but the complete opposite would be very very effective. Whereas I don't know, you have like Zack Snyder, for example, in Watchmen, shooting the rape scene, absolutely horrifying, because he shoots it as if it was like a consensual sexual scene where he's trying to get you to objectify the woman that is being raped at that point. And I was just wondering, like, I was wondering, because I haven't seen this movie yet. I want to watch this movie, but also I know it's going to be emotionally very scaring, because I'm still rattled from Don't Worry, Darling, and you thought that was light. So,
no, I will say, look, so, I have said, and I think, look, like I've discussed in what is in this film, this is a really dark and heavy film, and that is like, if I've just described to you, you hear these things, and you're like, well, I really don't want to see that. Then it's completely understandable that you wouldn't want to watch this film. But for me, I think this story being one about pain and trauma and fame and the all that, the sacrifice and horrors that come with that, and just sort of demonstrating this in a really stylish, fascinating, like, it's a really, really interesting way in which Dominik has put this film together. And I will say, though, some of the creative decisions do not work. There's certain things like returning to like shots inside the fetus and POV shots inside a vagina, which really didn't need to happen. There are certain creative decisions which I think he does take it too far and sort of is distracting, but overall I think the creative decisions are bold and effective, and I really don't see this as a film in which, you know, it is hard because, look, this was a real life person, and I understand people. I understand people getting up in arms about, your main character in this fictitious film was real. But like I said, I think the main way to take away from it is that, one, this isn't a true-to-life biopic, and two, what this does, the true painful and traumatic life of Monroe is demonstrated here, and one that acts as a great companion to her works and makes her just a really astounding and brilliant figure to me. And I think honestly, that's my biggest takeaway from it.
Yeah, like the theme that the movie seems to be going for, to me does not seem disrespectful in any way. For me, it's all about the execution. That's why I'm griping as much on that. Because again, I haven't seen it yet, and it's going to be a while till I sit down to watch it, because I do not expect to come out of this film feeling great about myself and ready to do other things.
But I do think it is a really effective piece. I know people said they couldn't watch more than a certain amount, or they felt disgusting after. I felt really quite moved by it, actually, and I was really quite sad by the end of it. And I think that was I think it is an effective piece, and it is almost 3 hours as well. It's a long film. It's 2 hours 40, which is oddly, I think, about the same length of that Elvis film. But I think this is a far riskier and more daring film than that. I don't know, that was a random comparison, I guess, just because they're both 2022 biopics. But
but anyway. But also they're both about like two very kind of like comparable figures. So I understand that.
But yeah, I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. That is my final score for Blonde. Some people may hate me for that, but
reviews.
Hey ho. That's how I feel about it. But anyway,
that's after all.
That is our unwanted opinion after all. This may be the end of unwanted opinion. Who knows? Maybe I'll get stopped after this. But look, that will be the end of today's show, and thank you very much, Gonzalo, for joining me on this World Cinema
It's been an absolute pleasure, like always. And honestly, I come out of this review, like I hope many of our listeners, with two new movies that I want to take a look at. So,
but yes, on next week's show, we're beginning the horror movie season, as it is October now. Halloween season is approaching, but we're still going to keep it a little bit light next week, because we're going to be talking about comedy horror films, some of our favourites and some best we can recommend. Hopefully Kyle will be back for that. I'm sure that'll be his kind of episode. But yes, guys, please follow Unwanted Opinion Podcast on Spotify and on the YouTube. Everything you do will help the channel. And also visit unwantedopinion.net right now, because there is now new articles, a full written Blonde review if you want to really dissect what I've got to say about it, and also a September review roundup for the rest of it, including After Yang. But yes, we just gave our opinions on our world cinema and Blonde and After Yang. But at the end of the day, those were unwanted opinions. Thank you very much.